Everyone. How are you guys?
Good.
Good. I love all the smiling faces because it's Saturday. We love Saturday, don't we? Probably my favorite, I don't know, one of my favorite days of the week. So I'm Joanne. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work for Novant, the purple team, go purple. And I also specialize in sport and exercise psychology. So this is a perfect fit for me because I believe in a lot of different aspects of this. And today, Kelsey asked me to really go into a deep dive with you all into stress and stress management, or as I like to say, trying not to be a mess when life throws us stress, right? Tried to think of a catchy title there. It's not, creativity is not one of my strengths. So I thought we would start with just some myths about stress. So if I don't have any symptoms, I must not be stressed. Is that a myth or a fact? Myth, yeah. Why is that a myth,
hey,
guys?
counselors over here, you're not allowed to answer.
Why is this a myth? Why do you guys think this isn't true? Oftentimes we're not aware that we're stressed, right? Yeah. I don't know if you guys have had that moment in life where all of a sudden that last thing gets put on your plate and you're just totally overwhelmed in that moment, right? It wasn't that one thing, it was the 50 things that happened before then, but we were so busy we didn't realize, or we weren't being intentional enough or present enough to really realize the toll that stuff was taking on us. So as we talk about awareness and being present and being intentional, we want to make sure that we're doing that and seeing what are those stressors that are taking away from me right now. Stress only comes from negative life events.
Myth.
Myth, right? Who has an example of a positive life event that's incredibly stressful?
Wedding.
Weddings, yes.
Birthday party.
Birthday party. Driving to Jacksonville with the hurricane. Any like newborn parents in the room?
No, but I remember.
You remember, right? Kids are a lovely part of life. Incredibly stressful. Yeah, absolutely. When I'm stressed, I shouldn't focus on self-care because it takes too much time.
Myth.
Myth, right? Okay, let me say this again. When I'm stressed, I shouldn't focus on self-care because it takes too much time. That's a myth, right? Yeah. So it means when we're stressed, we really should focus on this. I say this to myself all the time. I'm like, it's fine. Like I don't have to worry about that. I shouldn't exercise. I got too much work to do. No. That is a complete myth. Actually, and we'll get into the science a little bit about this, but when we're stressed, activity in our prefrontal cortex, which is this frontal lobe right here, totally shuts down. This part of our brain is responsible for those higher order functions, so like decision making and processing and kind of problem solving. And when that shuts down and we're stressed, we're so much less efficient in our work. And so if you can take the time to kind of have those healthy rhythms and really take care of yourself, you're going to be a lot more efficient. And then when you're more efficient, you get things done quicker, and then there's less stress, and that snowball just rolls in the right direction. So keep that in mind. Okay, so what is stress? So stress in general is our body's reaction to any sort of change or demand or response in our environment. We also can talk about stress as like emotional unease. I think that's a lot of, when we think about stress, that's what I think about, is like just kind of feeling a little bit frustrated or a little bit like that chest heaviness that we can get. And then of course feeling of being under abnormal pressure. So what happens when we're stressed? Well, historically, we have this thing called the fight or flight response. Have you guys heard this? What happens, I mean, I know it's right up there, but what happens in the fight or flight response? What do we feel?
Like either punching someone or running away.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Or like if you're like me, it's like freeze, like we just freeze because it's danger. This is a great thing that we have in our bodies. This system is so helpful. It's like you walk into the woods, you're on like an awesome mountain run and you see a bear and it's like, oh my gosh, bear, and then you just run the other way, right? What happens is your body pumps blood, it shuts down all the parts of your body that you don't need in that moment, like digestion, but then it puts all the blood into the parts that you need. So your lungs, your heart rate, all of this stuff starts to kind of go on, like kind of, it's like gasoline on fire. This is so helpful. Like, I can't tell you, have you guys had that experience when you're driving and someone, cuts you off and then you get that like, oh, okay, right? That is that fight or flight response. And it's great. It tells us about danger. It helps us run away from things. But the problem is us, especially in this day and age, that response is it's chronic, right? So we are in fight or flight mode all of the time. And that's not what it was meant to do. It was meant to tell us about danger and help us through those situations. And we're so stressed all the time that our fight or flight modes are on. And that's where we really see that impact, because under chronic stress, we have this elevated hormone called cortisol. Have you guys heard of that? Guess what cortisol does? Makes you gain weight, right? No one wants that. Right here, right? Right in those sections that we don't love. That's what, and it does other things too, but it also reduces our neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine, which are the two neurotransmitters that play the biggest role in depression. So when we don't have those, we're going to be at a higher risk for depression. We also know that there's that evidence that our brain rewires, which I was talking about earlier. And of course, it can lead to more mental health problems and physical health problems. All right, so this is as sciencey as I'm going to get today, I promise. So what happens with stress and mental health? I want to introduce something that we call the diathesis stress model. So this is an oversimplification of this relationship between stress and mental health, because obviously there are other variables, but this is always what I try to think about and how I try to explain this to the patients that I work with. So everyone has an underlying diathesis to experience a mental health concern. That's kind of our genetic code, right? So someone may be more prone to depression than the other person. That's that purple that you see. But stress, or the stress that we encounter, activates that, or it kind of causes that genetic predisposition to manifest. So if we can keep our stress under control, then we're doing a really good job, right? Like we're under that threshold when we start to see those symptoms. But if we're not regulating our stress, and if we don't really take care of it, we're gonna hit that line, and all of a sudden those symptoms are gonna come up. So this tells us genetically, like, you could be at a really high risk for a mental health concern, but as long as we're focusing on stress management, you're gonna be fine. We're gonna be okay. I do want to make a disclaimer. I'm not advocating for us to live in bubbles, right? I'm not saying take every stress out of your life, like that would be realistic. But I think about this a lot with our kids, right? Like we have kids, and of course we don't want them to encounter stress, but they're going to, right? And so I worked in college athletics for the majority of my career, and I would see these kids come into college, and their parents did such a wonderful thing in trying to protect them and trying to shield them from all the stress that they can encounter, and then they get to college and it's this, right? Because there's so much stress and they don't know how to manage that. So instead of focusing on removing stress, let's focus on how do we handle it? What do we do with it? Because it's inevitably going to happen, right? Physical health, this is not my area of expertise. I'm not a physician, so we're going to go through this very lightly, but I really took a lot of it from Gelsey's handbook, so refer to that. It's a great resource. Of course, it increases our risk of cardiovascular disease. Really what we want to think about here is if you're someone that feels that like sense of urgency, the impatience, the hostility, feeling rushed, those are those emotions that increases this particular risk. Of course, we know that it increases hypertension or blood pressure, which comes with a lot of different physical health concerns. We know that it decreases our immune system. Has anyone experienced this? When you're really stressed, you're more likely to get sick? This used to happen to me all the time in grad school, like right before finals. I would always get that finals cold, as we called it. And we know that when we get sick, when we're stressed and we're not taking care of ourselves, we recover a lot slower. And then from a pain perspective, I work a lot with this in my practice too. When people are stressed, their chronic pain syndromes or just pain in general can increase and kind of be exacerbated. So that's something that we want to think about. All right, so last type of stress that I want to introduce to you guys, and I really want to take some time here, is called compassion fatigue. Have you guys heard of this before? Mm-hmm. What do you guys know about it? Or what have you heard about it? It's okay if you're like, I've just heard the word.
Just when you're in a caring position.
Exactly.
Frequently where the energy is going always out and towards
Yes.
caring for someone else, but nothing's getting
Yeah.
You're not getting a break.
We're not putting it back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the gas tank's kind of getting depleted, but we're not replenishing it. So yes, this happens in those helping professions when we're providing a lot of empathy, right? Do you guys know who Brene Brown is?
Mm-hmm.
She's awesome, right? Rock star. She has this this idea of empathy where like it's not just saying, oh, at least you're still doing well in school, or at least you're, because nothing empathic ever started with at least, right? What empathy is really like getting down on the level of that person and feeling what they're feeling in that moment, right? And I know how many of you guys have sat with someone who is truly suffering, whether it be emotionally, physically, spiritually. What does that feel like for you? Heavy, right? Sad. Draining, yeah. For me, like, it's those days where you get home and you're just like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know if I did enough, right? Like, I start to question myself, like, was I enough in that moment for that person? And it starts to make me worry, and then I'm like thinking about that person. I have a patient right now who I'm really worried about, and I'm thinking about them on the weekend, right? So it's hard to set those boundaries. You really care and you worry, and that's what makes you guys so awesome at your jobs. And it takes this huge toll on you. And so what we want to think about is compassion fatigue is something that's kind of a byproduct of always having that, like you said, having that process go this way to your patients or to your clients or to the people that you're working with, and never refilling it back up. It's not their responsibility to fill us back up, right? That's ours. And so this is where I think Mission Fit really fits in with you guys, is that it's going to help you kind of fill that tank back up. And I think, I know about compassion fatigue a little bit with the research, and we know that it's a lot easier to prevent than it is to treat. So if you get here, that's when you need a vacation, you need to change like your job structure, you need to maybe have a little bit less clinical work. Like, we kind of want to, balance things a little bit, but we can certainly prevent this. And really it's by creating those healthy rhythms, as Nick was talking about. Just as a FYI, some of these symptoms that you might feel, for me, it's like when I start to get annoyed with my patients, right? Like, they'll come in and they'll be talking about something, and maybe they'll be like, oh, it's not as bad. You're having like this disproportionate response. Like, you shouldn't. And I'm like, what am I doing right now, right? Like, this person is suffering, and I'm like judging them for that. Like, who and what? And so that's a signal for me. If you blame people for their suffering, where it's like, yeah, but you just should have made that choice. What? What mind? What are you doing? Social withdrawal, if I disconnect and if I come home to my family and I don't want to be a part of it, if I'm going in my office to do work but really just sitting there because I can't interact with people, that's a huge sign for me. Frequently complaining. Anhedonia is like not enjoying things that you once enjoyed. So, yeah, like maybe you really love cooking, but you get home and you're like, ugh, sounds like such a burden. I'm going to run around and get fast food, right? Or of course, like substance use, if you just are like, I just need to have a couple glasses of wine and forget the day, right? So this is all stuff that you kind of want to think about. Like, of course, we all have those hard days, but keep in mind that if this is a feeling that you're getting a lot, that probably suggests that you're under quite a lot of compassion fatigue. That makes sense for you guys? So I want to introduce this idea, this analogy. I'm sure some of you guys have heard it, the oxygen mask analogy. So who's been on an airplane before? Awesome. So when they're going over the directions with this oxygen mask, they basically say, if in the event that the oxygen masks fall down, we want you guys to put yours on first before you put anyone else's on. Why do you think they say that? Like, logically, why should you put yours on first?
So you'll have air to breathe to help them get their air to breathe.
Exactly, because if you didn't put your mask on, how many people could you get to? Probably.
One.
Right, like one, maybe five if you're quick. But if you have your mask on, how many people could you help?
All of them.
All of them, right? So, I know I'm like drilling in this point, but what is y'all's mask? What do you guys think in this metaphor? What is your mask?
Self-care.
Yeah, y'all are so smart. I love it. Makes it so easy. So what are we even supposed to do, right? Like, how do we kind of battle this stress monster? Well, first we want to gain awareness. What stresses us out? So you got to know that first. Then you've got to think about, what am I going to do in terms of self-care? I think this is a term that's used across the board, and I think a lot of people like kind of know what it means, like, oh, it means to go home and like paint at night. But like, it's not always that, right? We want to think about it holistically, and we'll talk about that. And then also we really want to be proactive with this. So like adding in these, again, I'm going to steal your word, rhythms, because I loved that. Adding in these rhythms ahead of time before we get to that point where we're too stressed to be able to think about anything. How do you guys know when you're stressed? What happens?
Irritability.
Yes. Who can relate to that?
With my children especially.
Yeah, lack of patience. Yes. It's like, just put your dishes away, right? What else? How else do you know you're stressed? Eating? Yes, absolutely. Yes, going back for those, like that snack junk food, right? Because you know what happens? So we know in stress, chronic stress, that serotonin and dopamine goes down. Guess what types of food release serotonin and dopamine? Fatty sweets, right? Salty, fatty sweets. That's why it feels so good to eat those. How else do we know we're stressed? Sleep? What happens to our sleep?
It doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen, right? It goes away.
Or it happens
Or you
too much.
sleep all the
Yeah.
time.
Or you sleep all the time. Or it's like not restorative, right? So no matter what you're sleeping, you're not restorative. I also really have a hard time focusing when I'm stressed. Yep.
Maybe illogical.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's hard to, I'm like, why can I not comprehend this right now? And then sometimes I'll get that feeling where it's like kind of that heaviness in my chest. You all know what I'm talking about? It's like, whew, there's like a 10-pound weight sitting right here. So, what are some of our stressors? Look at all these projects I haven't started. That was like my week this week. That's why I emailed Kelsey this PowerPoint last night. What do you guys dread? What do you dread doing?
Chores.
Thank you, right? Chores.
Yeah.
Details, yeah. The
Details.
boring details.
Yeah, putting away my laundry, right? That is the one thing it is a struggle for me to do that. What do you guys usually procrastinate?
Making phone calls.
Making phone calls? Takes a lot of energy.
Yeah, it does.
Absolutely. When do you feel overwhelmed?
When we're stressed.
When we're stressed, yeah. For me, it's if I've had, like if I'm doing trauma work, if I have like 3 or 4 trauma sessions in a row, I feel overwhelmed after that, right? We get back to that compassion fatigue.
Or like looking at, mine is like even up ahead of it, like looking,
Yes.
like I see clients do, if I look ahead and see who's on the docket for the day,
Yes.
I know it's all really intense, I'm already stressed before I go into it thinking
Yep.
it's too much or I can't do it. Or,
Yeah, and look at those thoughts, right? This is too much, I can't do it.
Mhm.
Absolutely, that's what that stress tells you in that moment. 100%, we kind of, or like even if we look at our week and it's like, I don't have enough time to finish all of this that I have to do. And when is it difficult to turn off your brain? At night, right? Right? What is that? Why when we fall down and we're trying to be quiet is the one time those thoughts just race? It's really interesting. So exercise can really help us with this because exercise gets us used to being kind of quiet, like you were saying, quiet and intentional and present without having that rumination. Usually during the day, we're so busy and we're so distracted by things that we don't have quiet time to ourselves. And so that's why when we finally fall asleep at night, our brain's just like on overload. And so exercise is a wonderful way to kind of start practicing. I can be alone and quiet with myself and reflective and not be ruminating and stressed out. I hope you guys see that change over time. So I'm rambling, so I'm gonna kind of summarize quickly. So what is self-care? This is intentionally taking care of yourself. Again, when you guys start to feel stressed, instead of having that thought, oh, I don't have time to go to the gym, I don't have time to pray, I don't have time to, do what I need to do to take care of myself, that tells you that is your number one priority. Self-care is your number one priority in that moment. And we want to be proactive and develop a routine. So really quickly, I want you guys to think about the last time in your life where you felt overwhelmed or you felt stressed. It could have been this week, like me, or it could have been, this morning or a couple months ago. And I want you to kind of just think about, what did your self-care look like? So how much was it? How frequent did it happen? What types of activities or strategies did you use? Was it intentional? Was it unintentional? Was it just kind of like out of habit? Was it a part of your daily routine, or was it kind of more inconsistent? And was it reactive or proactive? So take like 30 seconds, and as you guys kind of start to mentally answer these questions, jump in and share kind of what happened for y'all.